Imagine this. Before dawn, on June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in human history is about to begin. Over 150,000 soldiers from the Allied forces are crossing the treacherous English Channel, their eyes fixed on the heavily fortified beaches of Normandy, France. This isn't just another battle. This is Operation Overlord, the day that will forever be known as D-Day. The fate of the world hangs in the balance. For years, Nazi Germany had tightened its grip on Europe, building a seemingly impenetrable Atlantic wall. But on this day, the Allies are coming to tear it down. How did this single monumental operation turn the tide of World War II and set in motion the final collapse of the Third Reich? Let's dive into the story of D-Day and its crucial role in liberating a continent. To understand the sheer importance of D-Day, we have to look at the state of the war in 1944 Germany. Despite facing immense pressure from the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front, still controlled most of Western Europe. A successful invasion was the only way for the Allies to establish a major foothold on the continent and open up a new front. This wasn't just about liberating France. It was about forcing Germany to fight a war on two massive fronts, a scenario that its military command had always feared. The pressure had been building for years. Stalin had been pleading with Roosevelt and Churchill to launch a second front to relieve the Red Army, which was bearing the brunt of the fighting. D-Day was the answer to that plea. The planning for Operation Overlord was a masterpiece of military strategy, logistics, and deception. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, was in charge of this colossal undertaking. The Allies assembled a force of nearly 3 million men, supported by thousands of ships and aircraft. But brute force alone wasn't enough. The Germans knew an invasion was coming. They just didn't know where or when. This is where Operation Fortitude comes in, a brilliant deception campaign. The Allies created a phantom army, complete with inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, and double agents. To convince Hitler that the main invasion would target Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the channel. The deception was so effective that even after the Normandy landings began, Hitler held back crucial panzer divisions, believing the real attack was still to come elsewhere. This single act of misdirection gave the Allies the critical time they needed to secure their beachheads. When the moment finally came, the invasion was a breathtaking spectacle of coordinated chaos. Allied paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines in the dead of night to secure key bridges and cause confusion. Then, as the sun rose, the naval bombardment began, pounding the German defenses. The landing forces hit 5 designated beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The resistance they met varied. On Utah Beach, American forces landed with relatively light casualties. But on Omaha Beach, it was a different story. The American troops faced a slaughterhouse. Heavy German fire raked the beaches, and for a few terrifying hours it looked like the landing might fail. Yet, through incredible acts of bravery and sheer determination, small groups of soldiers broke through the defenses. And by the end of the day, a fragile toehold had been established. The cost was immense, with thousands of casualties, but the Atlantic Wall had been breached. The immediate aftermath of D-Day was a brutal race against time. The Allies needed to pour more men and supplies into Normandy faster than the Germans could bring in reinforcements. This was the Battle of Normandy. The terrain itself became an enemy. The dense hedgerows of the French countryside, known as the bocage, provided perfect defensive positions for the Germans, turning every field into a potential death trap. The fighting was slow, attritional, and incredibly bloody. Cities like Cannae were reduced to rubble as the Allies fought for every inch of ground. However, the Allies had one overwhelming advantage: air supremacy. Allied fighter bombers roamed the skies, destroying German tanks, supply lines, and reinforcements, making it nearly impossible for the Wehrmacht to mount a successful counterattack. The strategic breakthrough came in late July with Operation Cobra. Led by the aggressive American general George S. Patton, the Allies finally broke out of the Normandy pocket. Patton's Third Army raced across France in a lightning advance that stunned the German command. This breakout led to the encirclement of a massive German force in what became known as the Falaise Pocket. Although some Germans escaped, their losses in men and equipment were catastrophic. It was a decisive defeat from which the German army in France would never recover. The path was now clear. On August 25, 1944, just 2.5 months after D-Day, Allied forces and French resistance fighters marched into Paris, liberating the city to the joyous celebration of its citizens. The liberation of the French capital was a powerful symbolic victory. So, how did all of this directly lead to the fall of Nazi Germany? First and foremost, D-Day opened the crucial Western Front. Germany was now caught in a vice, squeezed between the advancing Soviets in the east and the rapidly advancing Allies in the west. Hitler was forced to divert precious troops, tanks, and resources away from the Eastern Front to try and stem the tide in France. This drastically weakened Germany's ability to fight the Soviet Union, accelerating the Red Army's advance towards Berlin. The two-front war, which Germany's military strategists had tried so hard to avoid, was now a grim reality, and it was draining the Third Reich of its last reserves of strength. Furthermore, the liberation of France gave the Allies a massive logistical base on the European mainland. The ports of Cherbourg and Antwerp were captured and repaired, allowing an endless stream of supplies, fuel, ammunition, food, and new soldiers to pour into the front lines. Germany, on the other hand, was being crippled. Allied bombing campaigns were relentlessly hammering its industrial cities, oil refineries, and transportation networks. The German war machine was slowly but surely being starved of the resources it needed to continue the fight. The Wehrmacht could still mount fierce resistance, as it did during the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944, but these were the last desperate gasps of a dying regime. That offensive, Hitler's final gamble in the West, ultimately failed, costing him his last remaining armored reserves. By the spring of 1945, the end was in sight. The Allies crossed the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier into Germany. From the east, the Soviets were closing in on Berlin. The German army, shattered and demoralized, began to surrender in mass numbers. The once mighty Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years was collapsing. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops just blocks from his bunker, Adolf Hitler took his own life. A week later, on May 8th, Germany officially surrendered. The war in Europe was over. From the bloody sands of Omaha Beach to the liberation of Paris and the final push into Germany, the line is direct. D-Day was the beginning of the end. It wasn't just a military victory. It was a triumph of planning, courage, and international cooperation. It punched a hole in Fortress Europe that could not be closed, draining Germany's resources and forcing it into an unwinnable two-front war. The sacrifice of the thousands who fought and died on June 6, 1944, opened the path to freedom for millions. Their bravery changed the course of history and ensured the downfall of one of the most destructive regimes the world has ever seen. The legacy of D-Day reminds us that even in the darkest of times, courage and determination can forge a path towards a better future. Thanks for watching. If you found this look at history fascinating, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. See you next time.